Last Epoch is an indie fantasy action RPG. If you enjoy games with fast-paced and never-ending combat like Diablo or Path of Exile, I'd highly recommend it. The gameplay is up there with the greats. But we're not here to talk about gameplay today. We're here to find out if Last Epoch's story is any good, and maybe talk a little bit about gameplay. Before we start tearing through the story of a great indie game, a quick note about action RPGs. Story is not the main focus of these games, as opposed to more traditional RPGs. It's a loose distinction, but an important one. That said, the key to a good story is how enjoyable experiencing the story is. So most of my review is going to be me just rambling about my experience of the game. Now, I'm not the smartest tool in the shed, and sometimes I got completely lost. So occasionally, I'll throw in bits of lore that I researched afterwards, so that hopefully y'all don't get as lost as I did. If you don't want story spoilers, play the game.
Or let me know in the comments below if you're interested in spoiler-free video game story recommendations.
We begin with Chapter 1, The Keepers. I chose my class, the Sentinel, and was immediately pulled into the world's creation story, narrated by some primal entity of the void and nothingness named Robus, which I thought was a pretty cool start. There was one thing in existence alongside Void Boy, a goddess named Atera. She created the world along with humans to live in it and gods to govern it. Many eras later after its creation, Atera mysteriously disappeared, and one of her children, the sun god Rye, decided the world was his for the taking. And we, a random traveler, are introduced here. We find a letter addressed to us from an organization called the Keepers. They want our assistance in the fight against Rye, and this whole intro gave off some major main character vibes. I'd previously tested this game in early access, and back then there were individual backstories for each class, which made the character feel more grounded, but they seem to have been removed from the game now. There could be an excellent reason for this, and it may have changed since I last played, but in the moment it made me feel like a generic main character bestowed with just because blessings. Anyway, our objective is to find the Keeper's camp. We fight our way through Rye's bird baddie soldiers and meet a depressed warrior named Grail on the way. He's here to make an alliance with the Keepers on behalf of his country, Hiaboria. When we arrive at the camp, we learn that the Keepers are protecting a mysterious artifact given to them by the goddess Atera. The artifact was scattered across the world in 3 shards for safety, and Rye is now hunting them to gain more power. We're sent off to aid a keeper who's trying to retrieve one of the shards from some vault before the bird god swipes it. And at this point I was getting interested in why these artifact shards were so important. Unfortunately, the keepers refused to spare me any details.
Here's a candy bar.
Oh,
No, I'm withholding it.
This began a slightly upsetting pattern that would repeat itself throughout the rest of the campaign, where characters would often withhold information from you about critical plot elements. On the one hand, it adds an air of mystery to the game, but on the other hand, when you're not told why your immediate objective is important in any way, it kinda kills your drive to pursue it. If this game was a story game and didn't have awesome mechanics and combat that I wanted to explore, I might have dropped it right there, but maybe I'm just a baby who needs to be spoon-fed motivation. I don't know. Our demoralized sentinel continued onwards until we found the questing keeper, and damn do I love this old man's character design. Balthus has got a goofy-ass name and a goofier-ass hairdo that makes it look like his giant pet dragonfly is his barber, which seems to prefer nibbling on Grandpa's hair to the giant flowers on his shoulders. Turns out, Balthus is already carrying another shard of the artifact, and we're immediately attacked by more angry birds. After saving the old keeper's life, he again refuses to tell us anything about the artifact and initiates an escort quest, well known to be every gamer's favorite type of quest. As we lead him through the vault, he collects the second shard of the artifact and is promptly kidnapped by an enemy general. There was a neat in-game sequence for this kidnapping, which was small but enjoyable, although sadly it was one of only a few such scenes that were memorable to me throughout the game. First, we go to save Balthus, defeating the Osprix general in the process, and here I'd like to mention one of the optional storytelling mechanics Last Epoch uses. Scattered around the world are piles of paper that you can click on, often formatted as letters or journal entries from certain characters, which give you more insight into the world. These are usually pretty flavorful. For example, right after defeating Balthus's kidnapper, the Osprix general Orion, we find his journal and learn about his twisted nature, but also his deep connection with his mount. Orion had lost a wing in battle, and so he got this bird mount. He got extremely attached to his bird companion, so much so that he wished he could feed his troops to it for snacky snack time to make it happy. This made it feel like I just defeated a character that was a real part of a living world, and I loved how all of these lore tidbits were formatted as writings from characters in the game. Anyway, we returned to the Keeper's camp with a jaded Balthus, who immediately decided the best way to protect the artifact was to f*** off to some point in the future, by himself, with 2 of the 3 shards of it. I mean, I get the urge to not want to deal with a scary sun god, but this doddering old fool had just been rescued from a kidnapping twice. I don't know why he thought going lone wolf was a good idea. As expected, his plan shits itself spectacularly and we're caught up in the collateral, teleported into what looks like another world, with one of Balthus's 2 artifact shards arriving at our feet. This is where Chapter 2 of the campaign starts, titled The Ruined Future, and in my opinion, where the story becomes much more thought-provoking. We realize the artifact, which is called the Epoch, and I don't remember at what point I learned that, can be used for time travel. Having no way to go forward, we fight through hordes of twisted and corrupted purple creatures in this void-violated world, until we make it to the last refuge. We learn that the whole world has gone to hell, and is currently vomiting itself into the void, and our only hope of saving it is tied to the Epoch. Balthus arrived in the future a few lifetimes before us, carrying his shard of the Epoch. Rest in past peace, my favorite old fool. As the Epoch is our only lead on saving the world, we adventure out to find Balthus's lost shard, fighting void monsters and corrupted scholars on the way. The first difficult boss fight I encountered was Elder Panion, who was supposedly an expert on the Epoch and running experiments to make Balthus's shard useful. But during my playthrough, I missed this tidbit of lore about him and thought I was fighting some random corrupted village elder who just happened to have a shard of the artifact. This leads me to a pattern I noticed while researching Last Epoch's story for the video. There were many story beats that I completely missed, despite intentionally focusing on the story while playing the game. In some cases, this was my fault, as I was live streaming my playthrough and not taking detailed notes. But sometimes important parts of the story are hidden in optional side content, and sometimes all the fluffy and jumpy dialogue of the main quest makes it hard to understand what's happening in the story. Final Fantasy XIV, is that you? Defeating Panion gave us our second shard of the Epoch, which immediately reacted with the shard already in our possession, and yoinked us to a floating island in outer space called the End of Time. I thought this place was dope as hell, and here's why. There are versions of NPCs we've already met, but from alternate timelines, and various versions of you, and presumably other people who've accessed time travel in their timelines. This is a great explanation for seeing other players in this area. I love it when multiplayer games have lore explanations for why you can see other players, which can sometimes be immersion-breaking. MMORPGs, I'm looking at you. Elder Gaspar here helps us tap into the knowledge of our past/alternate versions of ourselves, which unlocks our subclass. And so I evolved from a silly little sentinel to the powerful paladin, henceforth known as PP. This made a lot of sense to me, and I loved that the lore explained how you get your subclass. Lots of times, the progression of your character's power in a game feels oddly disjointed from the progression of their story, but this was a wonderful marriage of the two. 10 out of 10 will be attending again. Armed with our newfound PP and 2 shards of the Epoch, we can now time travel, so we return to the Ruined Era to continue our search for the last shard of the Epoch, or dare I say, the Last Epoch. Anyway, this marks the beginning of Chapter 3, reasonably titled Seeking the Last Shard. The final shard rests where the Keepers hid it thousands of years ago, in the Temple of Etera. On our way there, we travel to the ruins of Welrin, which are chock full of void creatures and cultists. Some traveling through tears in time shenanigans had us leaping through space and time to puzzle our way through the story. Kinda neat. But my favorite thing about Chapter 3 was a side quest, where the game allowed you to gaslight an NPC quite spectacularly. For context, there was a group of people who separated from the other survivors in the last refuge, and eventually perished defending their own mini-society called the Lesser Refuge. A scholar back in Last Refuge was curious about their history, and on our travels to find Etera's temple, we stumbled across the ruins of the Lesser Refuge, as well as some journal pages where the long-gone denizens had recorded their history. I read the pages and returned to the curious historian at Last Refuge, where I proceeded to convince her that the people of Lesser Refuge wanted their society to be known by a different name, Rat City. This was a blatant lie, but having the option to say this and then actually convince the NPC it was true gave me a bigger dose of dopamine than I'd had yet from the game's main story, especially as the closing dialogue option was, "Long live Rat City." It would have made Germa proud. Finally, we arrived at the Temple of Etera, and a majestic voice boomed through the halls.
Finally, after so long. Etera, is that you?
I'm still not sure who this voice belonged to, but I assumed it was the primordial narrator from the beginning, Arobis. They asked if I was a Terra returned, or here to make the Epoch whole again, and I thought it was super cool, except there was never any follow-up and I still have no idea what the voice was talking about. Eventually we reached the final boss, a giant corrupted emperor who for some reason is just sitting in the temple with the final shard of the Epoch. Turns out this was the Immortal Emperor who we meet later in the story, but I never made this connection until researching the story post-playthrough. In retrospect, it's pretty cool that you get to kill bosses first and time travel to get to know them later. Upon defeating him, we collect the third shard of the Epoch, experience a cinematic that tells us our journey is just beginning, and get yoinked back to the end of time for further guidance. Elder Gaspar at the end of time conjectures that the void corruption may have started after the gods fell, caused by the Immortal Emperor in his search for true immortality. I was a bit confused by the timeline here, so here's a chart to hopefully help you be a little less confused. We started the game close to the end of the Divine Era. At the end of it, all the gods died, I think. Some shithead figured out a way to use the dead god's power to become immortal, and began handing out immortality to those loyal to him, creating the Immortal Empire and kicking off the Imperial Era. This is some 1,000 years after the start of the Divine Era. Around 300 years later, void corruption in the world was too rampant and the Empire had fallen apart, thus starting the Ruined Era, which continued getting more and more ruined until nothing was left at the end of time. There was also the Ancient Era, starting from the beginning of creation and lasting 6,000 years before the Divine Era. I know nothing about this one except that I visited it to cheat through puzzles and there are giant jungles overrun by dinos and dragons. Zooming into the Imperial Era, as we now suspect the Hungry Void corruption was started by the Immortal Emperor, it's become our job to investigate this theory and kill the Emperor even earlier in time in a bit of a Kill Hitler-esque plot. This kicks off Chapter 4, The Outcasts and the Empire. We time travel to the Outcast camp, the hideout of the surviving rebels who refused to succumb to the Immortal Emperor's rule. The Outcasts direct us to a person who knows a way to get to the Emperor, but they've been kidnapped, so we find their magic ring which guides us to them, defeat the Immortal General who kidnapped him, Captain Harton, and when we find the person, he turns out to be a useless himbo mage who likes jumping off of boats into stormy waters for no fucking reason. Introducing Ulrich, my least favorite companion side character, which is impressive, as I normally love and relate to himbo characters. They're just silly little guys.
Oh my god, I could actually ask this guy why doesn't he just fight something for once instead of just meeting me there.
And that's it for Chapter 4. The only thing in this chapter that caught my attention was, again, a side quest where I couldn't enter a door, so I had to time travel to the future to take the key off the gatekeeper's corpse, then go back to the past to use it. Later I learned that this side quest was supposed to teach me that the Immortals weren't truly immortal, rather just perpetually siphoning the life force from actual living people. This explains why the Immortal Emperor was still seeking some truer form of immortality. But somehow I didn't catch this at the time. Still, I thought including time travel in the side quest design was cool. After following the himbo's heroic hop into stormy seas, we wash up on the shore near a city called Majasa. This is the desert region. Chapter 5 is titled Aid from an Oracle, and the story had kind of lost me at this point. It felt like a bunch of filler was happening, with only the side quests providing anything meaty. To summarize though, Ulrich knows an oracle, who knows where a back door into the Emperor's Citadel is. We fight some more baddies, do some quid pro quo questing for the oracle, and after she tells us where to go, we defeat another leader of the Immortal Empire, by Master Zarek, who guards a teleporter of some sort. This leads to Chapter 6, Infiltrating the Immortal Citadel, as that's exactly what we're doing. This is the chapter where I was the most confused. The teleporter spits us out in the Citadel where we meet Yulia, the right hand of the Immortal Emperor, who seems to want our help betraying the Emperor. I'm kinda bamboozled by why my character would listen to anything this weird undead lady has to say. Ulrich doesn't trust her, but he's too useless to stop the plot holes. When I'm alone with Yulia, she discusses some plan we made together, although I'd never seen her before, let alone made plans with her. Maybe if I could remember that this was a time travel story, this would have held some nice, dramatic irony, but even so, this interaction didn't make much sense for the player character. We fight our way through the Citadel until we reach the Immortal Emperor, where Yulia immediately betrays us. Double-cross her! We fight her, then we kill Harton and Zarek again, who suddenly got revived, and then it's time to fight the Emperor. But this fight doesn't happen because, surprise, Yulia is still alive and she's on our side again. Triple-cross her! She freezes the Emperor and tells us to kill him using the Lance of Hierot. What? I had no idea what this was. Since we don't have it, I guess the Epoch's spidey senses that we need to do some more time tickling and sweeps us back to the Divine Era. A quick aside here, I hate these sorts of boss fights, where you're doing great, easily killing bosses, but before whatever the final stage is supposed to be, the narrative takes over as if there's nothing you could do against the boss. I mean, I sliced through the Emperor's generals like a League of Legends player slicing through their own fragile mental. I don't think I needed some special lance to spear the Emperor with. Also, I think our himbo hero Alric died here, but I didn't notice till later. Chapter 7 begins here. And one cinematic slideshow later, we're back in the Divine Era, where we witness Raye killing the god of Hyperborea, Hierot. As the god is dying, he notices we possess the Epoch, and asks us to protect his people from Raye. He tells us to get his lance, and we meet Yulia, except she's a normal human, not immortal, and chieftain of the Hyperborean people. Here, my brain actually decided to function for once, and I realized that the Yulia who just triple-crossed us in the Imperial Era was probably planning to meet us all along, having met us in the past. At some point, she probably joined the Immortal Empire, becoming undead to bide her time and wait for our plan to complete. Unfortunately for her, we'd time-traveled in the wrong order and royally fucked up the plan. This was the first time that the time travel narrative of the main story made sense to me. It felt like I just slotted in my first 2 puzzle pieces, and honestly, I really enjoyed this story beat. Following this euphoric revelation, which had pulled me back into the story, were more humorous side quests. Most notably, one where an old man asked for some medicinal herbs, and when I delivered them, forced me to listen to his confession that the herbs were in fact an aphrodisiac to help him get it on with an elderly lady friend that he'd recently met. I love the quirky writing of these side quests, especially as they reward an essential boost to your character, making it near certain that players will repeatedly do them on each character that they make. We meet Grail again, the depressed Hyperborean warrior, and he, unlike Alric, actually helps us get the lance. We return to the dying Hierot, who blesses the lance, informs us that we now need blessings from the other 2 gods or the lance won't do shit to Raye, and proceeds to die with many pretty particle effects. Vote of confidence, we move on to Chapter 8, Lagon's Blessing, where, you guessed it, we seek the blessing of a god named Lagon. Yulia and Grail come with us, but have little to do despite having a lot to say, and not much they say is very informative either. On our way to Lagon, we meet Lyeth, Lagon's prophet. She's probably one of my favorite characters in the story. Lagon saved Lyeth from pirates when she was a little girl, and bestowed her with special powers. Lyeth then began to serve as the medium/prophet between Lagon and the humans who lived under his reign. She described herself as a glorified babysitter for a divine toddler who would level cities on a whim. A brilliant description which genuinely made me feel compassion for her. That sounds like a horrendous job. Babysitting regular babies is difficult enough already. However, because of how dangerous Lagon was to his people, Lyeth refused to grant us an audience with him. So what was our brilliant plan to get Lagon's blessing? Kill more things and progress through more areas. Classic ARPG style. We made our way to the large port city of Fatima, where we eventually found a captain willing to sail us to Lagon's lagoon. A captain named Harton. Yup, same name as Captain Harton of the Immortal Empire, who we'd killed a couple of times already. Except there'd been so much filler since I was last in the future that my brain missed this link completely. Harton takes us to Lagon's Isle, where we fight through the countless colonies of cranky crabs, before confronting Lyeth once again. Story-wise, this is my favorite boss fight in the game, as Lyeth is not a bad person, and I'd already built up compassion for her. However, knowing that the fate of the world was at stake, I couldn't back down, and neither could she, as she had to protect her people from her god. We sadly end up killing Lyeth before pressing on towards Lagon, who proceeded to one-shot my tanky peepee with a beam. Eventually, I managed to fight Lagon well enough for him to listen to my request, and he blessed my spear out of sheer amusement. And then it was time to head towards Majelka, city of the sands of Majasa, to get a blessing from the last available non-Raye god. On our way there, we meet Zarek, a dashing rogue, who offers his assistance after we save him from a bandit camp. Again, I did not make the connection that this dude had the same name as Spymaster Zarek of the Immortal Empire. Together, we made our way to the capital city of Majasa, and the politics here are juicy, if not depressingly on the nose. We pick up on racial and class discrimination, going on mostly between snake people called the Nagasa and human people. In the city's main square, we see a prophet of the goddess Majasa give a sudden speech, hinting that she wants to free herself and the city from her god's enslavement. This is interesting, but doesn't change the fact that we need to find Majasa, which Zarek agrees to help us do if we help him take over the Scalebane bandits. The Scalebane used to be this Robin Hood rebellious force, but eventually became bloodthirsty and ruthless. In the process of helping Zarek become their new leader, we learn that the Scalebane leader is actually an upper-class Nagasa in disguise. In return, Zarek helps us steal a giant bird from Raye's forces, which we promptly crash into the roof of Majasa's temple. Rest in peace, Talon, you are a better character than Ulrich could ever be. We fight our way through the temple and eventually run into the prophet we saw earlier, Vessel Maiden Apophis. And for some reason, she's calling to the Void? She speaks of Erebus, the god of the Void, and then flees deeper into the temple after summoning some Void critters. This is much earlier than we thought the Void first appeared in the world, but we shake off the surprise and keep fighting. We stumble into Majasa's auditorium, where we see Apophis declare that she will no longer be used by the goddess, who has historically sacrificed Vessel Maidens to prolong her own life. Apophis then plants void corruption in Majasa's brain. Majasa ruthlessly attacks us as soon as we enter the arena, and unlike Lagon, we keep fighting until she's dead and gone and spurting way too much blood all over the place. To be honest, it was badass, and I'm not sure if we actually get a blessing from her blood or what. But hyped up with these mysterious and exciting events, we pursue Apophis, and when we reach her...
You think this is over? You know nothing of the power I've been given. Orobis showed me the way. All I needed was the key, and you brought it right to me. The power of the Epoch is mine.
And that's it. That's the story, for now. I got into the endgame of Last Epoch, where you hop between alternate realities to further strengthen your character and fight alternate reality bosses. It took me a while to realize that there was no more story, as I was so convinced that the cliffhanger couldn't be the end. Turns out, it isn't. The developers are still planning to release 3 more chapters in future patches. But for now, that's all there is to the game's story. I think I caught most of the story during the experience, although there were many parts I only really understood after doing some additional research and rewatching my own gameplay. It's kind of difficult to rate a time-traveling story that isn't yet finished, but what we have so far felt alright. Only enjoying some of the main story beats throughout 9 chapters is a little underwhelming. The lore, however, is a different situation entirely. The amusing and intriguing side quests were amazing, the constant vibe of mystery surrounding the world was wonderful, and the time travel tie-ins were terrific. My favorite part, though, by a long shot, was the overall experience. Whenever the main story lost my attention, the side quests and mechanics pulled me back into the game, and that inevitably kept me interested in the lore and the story, as many of the game's mechanics and interactions, such as choosing your subclass, are tied in directly to the story. And is Last Epoch's story any good? Yeah, I'd give it 2 out of 3 epochs. If you'd like to read a proper summary of the story, check out the links in the description below. And I'd like to give a huge thanks to Angel Crest on the Last Epoch forums, who wrote that proper summary and made researching the lore for this video possible for me. Anyway, thanks for watching. If you liked it, please do the thing that YouTubers tell people to do, like commenting, liking, subscribing maybe. And if you hated it and disagree with my opinions, please shout at me down in the comments below. Alright, toodaloo.